Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of The Drop. And yes, it is our last edition of The Drop of this season. Greg Wyshynski, Arda, Öcal, and that is because the Florida Panthers are the Stanley Cup champions once again. Greg Wyshynski, they go back to back.
They go back to back. I'm still here at the arena where the celebration continues deep into the early morning of the following day. There is a party happening in the luxury suite level that is pouring out into the seats. Alexander Barkov, the captain of the Panthers, just brought the cup back on the ice for more fun and merriment in a soaking wet gray t-shirt that I imagine smells of champagne. And back-to-back cups for the Panthers, man. They really, really locked it down in games 5 and 6 in a manner in which the Edmonton Oilers had absolutely no room to operate or chance to turn this series around.
So we have a lot to unpack. We will get to the highlight in a second. You did mention celebrations. At any moment, the Florida Panthers Stanley Cup celebration could absolutely make its way outside of the arena and to the famous Elbo Room. So throughout the show, we will be monitoring. There's the live feed right now. I see no Stanley Cup at the moment. I don't see a convoy. I see fans have already congregated, but no cup as of yet.
Not yet. You know it's coming. I do believe that Matthew Tkachuk was asked about celebrations tonight and whether or not he'd bring the cup back to the ocean as he did last season. He said, I think he was non-committal about that. But the Elbo Room has become part of the lore when the Florida Panthers won the championship. There were signs in the arena referencing the Elbo. For those who don't know, a just absolutely disgusting dive bar that is like shoulder to shoulder on most nights, full of sweaty people spilling drinks on each other. But when the Panthers win, it becomes the mecca of Stanley Cup celebrations.
Has hosted hockey royalty. We will check in on the Elbo Room a little bit later, but first, let's show you exactly how the Florida Panthers won the Stanley Cup on this day. The Oilers were looking to avoid elimination. Connor McDavid and company taking on Sasha Barkov and the Florida Panthers. This was Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Finals. In the last 3 games, the Florida Panthers went up by multiple goals in the first period. On their first shot, inside of 5 minutes, they score the first goal. Samson Reinhart, his 4th consecutive game with a goal, beats Stuart Skinner glove side. Then, with seconds to go in the first period, under a minute, it's Sam Reinhart again, making it 2-0. In fact, it was Matthew Tkachuk scoring that goal. Pardon me. That was high slot, and that is 2-0. I said Sam Reinhart because, boy, was he all over the place. He had a game for the ages in this one. That was his 2nd of the game. The puck just hits Stuart Skinner's chest blocker, and then this one goes off the skates of Sam Reinhart. That's his 2nd of the game. Empty net, 3-0. Sam Reinhart scores his hat trick. He would add a 4th, and the Florida Panthers win the Stanley Cup for the 2nd consecutive year. 5-1 your final, and the celebration, it begins. That might as well be a Dairy Queen Blizzard that they're all holding, because they are once again Stanley Cup champions. After the game, our Greg Wyshynski spoke with Panthers defenseman Nate Schmidt on how it feels to win his first cup.
I think this is going to be the chance this time around. We believe in this group, and I just told him, I said, man, he looked at me, I didn't believe you at the time, but I believe you now.
Heavier than you thought?
No. I pick my kid up upside down all the time. It's about the same way. No, it was amazing. There's so much adrenaline. You can't feel a thing.
What was it like in those final moments on the bench?
Just lots of hugs and screams, and just, you don't really, it doesn't really register right away, right? Like, you can't really feel it until the cup comes out on the ice. You don't really know, right? Until you see it, feel it. It's got its own heartbeat, right? And it was something. It breathes all the players that have ever touched it. I think that's such a cool moment for any guy to be a part of. And any hockey player that dreams about playing in the Stanley Cup, that's what you're doing. You're making a memory, and you're in a fraternity with people that have done it forever.
So there
Man,
you have
Nate
it, Nate
Schmidt, man.
Schmidt, first-time champion. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
one
it-
thing I did like, Wish, was the passing of the Stanley Cup. He was the first one to receive it after Sasha Barkov, and all the first-timers got their time with the Stanley Cup first as they were determining the order. That was really cool.
Yeah, Nate. Nate, of course, famously plucked from the Washington Capitals in the expansion draft the year before they win the Cup. Then he's in Vegas, and then he is traded to Winnipeg for salary cap purposes a few years before they win the Cup. Comes to Florida as the replacement for Oliver Ekman-Larsson and becomes one of several players who weren't here last year for the Panthers that win the Cup for the first time. Of course, Arda, we have to talk about somebody who won the Cup for the second time. Many, many years passed from when he won it first with the Boston Bruins in 2011 to winning it now with the Panthers, and that's Brad Marchand. 6 goals in 6 games in the Stanley Cup Final. I mean, what do you say, man? This is why we watch hockey. Like, this is why we watch hockey. This is a guy who, played 16 seasons with the Boston Bruins, right? The Florida Panthers eliminate Boston in consecutive seasons. They are an arch nemesis to Brad Marchand. He is an arch nemesis to them. At one point, Sam Bennett hits Marchand in the head last season, puts him out of a playoff series. Can't come to a contract with the Bruins. They trade him to Florida at the trade deadline. And now the arch nemesis, they're all teammates. And in fact, Sam Bennett tonight talked about how when they made the trade for Marchand, he immediately went into the Florida Panthers group text and chirped Bennett about hitting him in the head during the playoffs last year. This is the twisted relationship these people all have with each other when it comes to what happens on the ice and then what happens off the ice. And Bennett said it himself, man. Like, he's sitting up there with the Conn Smythe Trophy. I was a voter this year. I know a lot of my colleagues really struggled with whether to cast their vote for Sam Bennett or cast their vote for Brad Marchand. And at the end of the day, it's Bennett that wins. But Bennett, sitting next to the Conn Smythe tonight, says, we do not win the Stanley Cup if it's not for Brad Marchand, and just brings it all full circle. The guys that used to be rivals become teammates. And then at the end of the day, if it's not for both of their efforts in these playoffs, the Panthers don't do what they did this season.
Speaking of jokes, Roberto Luongo also had jokes. Champion with an A, putting up a picture of him and Brad Marchand, referencing Marchand's tattoo from 2011 that he got after winning the Cup with the Bruins. This was a remarkable run. I would love to hear your perspective on how the Panthers were able to close out the Oilers in one less game and more games in emphatic fashion. Last year, it was by 1 goal. This year, it was more definitive. How were they able to do that?
They're deeper. They're better. They're better than they were last year. Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid both referenced that in their post-game comments after Game 6, and they're completely right. I mean, you think about Marchand coming to the Panthers. On another team, they're forcing a 37-year-old into a top-line role. On this team, he plays on the third line with Listerrainen and Lundell, and they fit perfectly together. And that line becomes, on some nights, their best line. No one has that depth. No one has that depth to have Lundell and Marchand on their third line. Seth Jones comes over from the Chicago Blackhawks. That is a demonstrable upgrade over Brandon Montour last year, all due respect to Montour. Him and Mikkola as a pairing, at times, better than Aaron Ekblad and Gus Forsling on the top pairing. So they're deeper and better. But as I pointed out in my pre-series prediction, which I'll remind you, Arda, was Panthers in 6.
Okay.
They did 2 things that the Oilers couldn't handle. First of all, they're absolute road warriors. And when you see what happened in Game 5, you see the culmination of all of the road victories and road experience the Panthers had in these playoffs. The best road team in NHL history in the postseason. They tied the highest number of wins for a road team, but they obliterated the record for goals scored away from home for any team in the postseason. So they go into Edmonton. They're undaunted by the moment, by the pressure. They win games. They come back here, And the difference between games 5 and 6, in my opinion, and what we saw out of them earlier in the series is they kept their foot on the gas. I don't want to disrespect the Edmonton Oilers, but this is the way I see the Stanley Cup Final this year. The only moments in which Edmonton was in this series were the moments in which the Panthers allowed them to be in the series. When they blew multiple goal leads, when they didn't meet the desperation of the Oilers earlier in the series. But then in games 5 and game 6, they just kept the gas pedal down all 3 periods, all those games, and you see the difference. Arda, I think that the Panthers, if I'm correct, set a National Hockey League record for the most time spent with a lead in the Stanley Cup Final, over 240 minutes. And the Oilers led for 33 minutes. It was a lopsided series in a lot of different ways that ended up going 6. But at the end of the day, as Connor McDavid said after the series, they're just a better team. And their defense, handling McDavid with Barkov and Reinhart and Bobrovsky, their offense, again, hitting 5 goals in a game. They're just a special team, and there's not really much the Oilers could have done in this series, especially with some of the deficiencies that they had in their lineup.
4.25 hours, just over 4.25 hours they've led in this, and that is an NHL record. Is Brad Marchand the greatest trade deadline pickup of all time?
He's going to be up there. The other one in the conversation is Butch Goring, who the Islanders acquired at the trade deadline. To really spark their dynasty back in the 1980s. But for the effectiveness of his play in the Stanley Cup Final, 6 goals in 6 games, for the way that he solidified their depth. And as Bill Zito, their general manager, told me tonight while we were on the ice and they're skating the cup, you can't discount what this guy meant for this team behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of inherent pressure in repeating as champion. He comes in, he's cracking wise. He's one of the boys. He's taunting people and trash talking on the ice. He's bringing the energy up, need it brought up. And more importantly, despite being the second best left wing of his generation behind Alex Ovechkin statistically, and a superstar in his own right, he fits seamlessly into this team, which is a tribute to their chemistry off the ice and a tribute to the way that he is able to integrate himself into different environments. So again, you can't discount all of the things that Brad brought to this team. And I think when you do that, he probably is the most important trade deadline acquisition in NHL history.
Yeah. I have more questions for you, but breaking news. Can we go back to the Elbo Room feed just one more time here, Justin? He told me some very stressful, sad news. Apparently the Elbo Room is closing down. What is happening here?
Look at all the people. They don't know what to do. Where do we go? Our North Star has been extinguished in the sky, the Elbo Room. Do you think this they're closing it down so the Panthers can go there?
That's what I'm hoping is the case. So maybe they might shut down these live feeds so that we don't see the celebration. I don't know. This is concerning right now. This does not look like an area of celebration at the moment. It looks very calm. It looks very orderly. People are crossing the street totally like cool. Oh, there's a high five.
The
we got a high five.
There we go. In the crosswalk, the Oilers fans out in the distance walking into the ocean, never to be seen again.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable. I don't know. I have faith that the Elbo Room is not yet to be shuttered this evening. That there'll be something later on as the Panthers maybe make their way through Fort Lauderdale with the Stanley Cup. But
yep.
Go ahead.
I was going to say I have a couple more questions for you about the game and the series itself. Sam Bennett wins the Conn Smythe. There was chatter about possibly Brad Marchand sneaking up, but Bennett seemed like the logical and clear choice here, right?
My ballot was Bennett, Marchand, and Draisaitl. And I really struggled with whether to put Marchand or Bennett number 1. And ultimately what I landed on, Arda, is the 15 goals are a ridiculous number. And the fact that he did it through the entirety of the playoffs. Now, Marchand, you could argue, had the high moments. the bigger moments, came through in the clutch in different ways, the overtime goals. Like I don't think there was a wrong answer for the Conn Smythe. But when you factor in Bennett's overall play, and if we're being honest, some of the nefarious things that Sam Bennett did during this playoff run, I think it's undeniable that he was their most valuable player.
I think that's a fair assessment. Let's talk a little bit about the Oilers side of things.
Yeah.
We'll get to Connor McDavid in a second. We're going to have a whole Connor McDavid conversation. First person I'd like to mention is Corey Perry. Now he's lost 5 Stanley Cup Finals in the last 6 years. And all of them are either against or with a state of Florida team, which is even more, adds even more to this lore. But man, how do you think, like, Corey Perry must feel like he's just completely jinxed and he can never win the Stanley Cup again?
Or he joins the Panthers next year when Marchand leaves. Like, I mean, that's
next
the other
chapter,
possibility too, right?
Yeah.
My next chapter is to, if you can't beat him, join him. The worm amongst the rats. Again, like when you start to really kind of peel back the layers of this series and of the Oilers' run to the Stanley Cup Final, you kind of get a sense of how their depth was so praised in the Western Conference Final and other playoff series, but then you see them against actual depth, like actual championship quality depth in the Panthers, and they're no match for it. And Perry did a great job, but ultimately Perry should probably play down the lineup because Zach Hyman should be on the top line. And as we start to think about why the Oilers did not succeed in winning the Cup in this rematch against the Panthers, we think about a couple of things. We think about Hyman being out, injured in the Dallas series. They missed him desperately. Not only his physicality, not only his play around the net. But Bobrovsky was not perfect tonight. There were opportunities to Bob. It's just nobody was around the net. And Hyman would have been. And also, his presence in the allowed them to play McDavid throughout the series because they were so exposed with their lack of depth, they couldn't really do that. The other thing I've been saying, Arda, is this. Like, there's going to be a lot of hot takes. We'll get to McDavid in a second about what happened to this team. But essentially, it's 3 things you got to worry about. Get a healthy Hyman for next year in the playoffs. Find a solution for your goaltending. We can talk about Skinner in a second. And hope that you don't play the Panthers. Like, the Panthers are to the Oilers as the Oilers are to the Kings. They cannot beat this team. And that's just a fact of life. You got to pray that, the Hurricanes or the Leafs rise up and upset the Panthers next year so you don't have to play them, because if you do, you're not going to win. They just have their number. They know how to defend this team. They know how to handle Draisaitl and McDavid. And the most important thing, Arda, they are not intimidated in the least by those guys or any adversity that might hit them in a series against Edmonton.
Really quick before we move on to McDavid, what will the Oilers goaltending look like or should look like next year?
I mean, I would wipe the slate clean. This is, for all of the talk about how good the Panthers were in this series and how it was going to be their cup to win as long as they didn't allow the Oilers the inches they needed to get back into embarrassment for a National Hockey League Stanley Cup contender in the final to go into a game 6 and have do the things they did with their goaltending, like have the starter benched and then come back. And I know that's like a tactic to try to get Skinner going, but that's just indicative of there being no good choice in this situation. Knoblauch screwed it up, man. Like, I gotta be honest with you, there's no way Skinner should have been benched after game 4. Draisaitl, all these guys all said the same thing. It wasn't his fault that he got torched for 3 goals in the first period. Now, Pickard comes in, plays well enough for them to win in overtime. But you go back to Edmonton, that should be Skinner's crease. I think Knoblauch really biffed it by putting Pickard in for game 5 because he wasn't good. And then he comes and runs it back with Skinner here. And obviously, what are you looking for from this guy? He's in an untenable spot. And you mentioned it during the highlight, the second Reinhart goal, where Barkov got the rebound and then put off of Reinhart's skates into the net. That's one of the worst goaltending plays I've ever seen in the Stanley Cup Final. Like, I don't have any idea what Skinner is trying to attempt here, Like, no. I talked to our colleague Kevin Weeks, and I think he was just as baffled as I was. And that guy's a former NHL goaltender. Like, this was just embarrassing. The whole thing was embarrassing. And to answer your question, they're going to have to figure out a solution. But the problem is, it's not going to be through unrestricted free agency. There's one option, Jake Allen, and he's going to be slightly better than what you have, but not really a solution. They need to go trade for a John Gibson. They need to go find somebody that's going to help solidify this position, because to do this again and to have this once again be the Achilles heel for Draisaitl and McDavid, it's an embarrassment for the organization. It's doing your star players wrong to have to make these kinds of decisions with your goaltending in the Stanley Cup Final.
All right, let's talk Connor McDavid. 2 straight Stanley Cup Final appearances, 2 straight losses. Already we're having the conversation about Connor McDavid's legacy. He's the best player in the game today. When it's all said and done, where will he fit in the pantheon of greats in NHL history? And I mean, look, I understand the notion that if he never wins a Stanley Cup, he can never truly be in that conversation. But for how good he is, that this kind of reminds me of the Alex Ovechkin episode that we did of the Drop Wish, where we talked about the different eras in his career. And one of them was that struggling era before he finally won the Stanley Cup, where people were writing think pieces about whether he would be a good leader or whether he will ever win the Stanley Cup. Maybe he should go back to the KHL. That was an opinion, at least by one writer, right, at the time. So, like, what I'm wondering is, from your lens, having covered this game for so long, seeing what you've seen of Connor McDavid, dominance on the ice, time in and time out, but not winning the Stanley Cup 2 years in a row, where are you with the Connor McDavid legacy thought and conversation?
It's a really tough look to not have a point in an elimination game. It really is. I mean, like, the bottom line is that they needed to score first, or else they would be chasing the game yet again. They didn't score first. The Panthers, I think, were 11 goals to 0 in the last 4 games of the series in the first period. And so they chased the game again. And so when you talk about Connor McDavid and you talk about making a difference in a game, it's not scoring a hat trick. It's not doing a Sam Reinhart and scoring 4 goals. It's simply creating a goal early on for your team so they can all exhale. And he couldn't do that tonight. In fact, he couldn't even hit the score sheet once tonight. And that's kind of a problem. But overall, as far as this series goes, Arda, and maybe even last year as well, he's going against a team that has 2 Selke-nominated forwards on the same line. He's going against 2 great defensive pairings. If he gets through all of that, he's got Sergei Bobrovsky, who now has back-to-back Stanley Cup wins and is without question one of the clutchest goaltenders we've seen come through in the league in the last 20 years. So I can't blame him for the lack of impact on a series when he's just going up against a team that might have his number. And he's also doing it without his top line winger next to him. So I don't know. Maybe I have too much sympathy for him, and maybe I should be more hot takey about his lack of success in the Stanley Cup Final. But I think there are so many other problems with the Oilers that aren't Connor McDavid that I'm going to exonerate him. And now we come to another point in the McDavid story, Arda, which is he's an unrestricted free agent. Not this summer, but next summer. Does he sign a contract this summer for the Oilers? If so, what's the length of that contract? Or does he maybe look to change things up in his career? Who knows? But as far as the blame game and what's the legacy for this guy? The legacy is don't play the Panthers. It's the legacy. Don't play the Panthers. You're Josh Allen to their Patrick Mahomes. Don't play the Panthers. You're the Jordan Bulls against their bad boy Pistons. Don't play the Panthers. That's just how it is sometimes. And for Connor, it's just how it is. Yeah.
That's a good point. And that begs the question that you alluded to this, can Connor McDavid win in Edmonton? I imagine if he is going to re-sign in Edmonton, and if he is going to sign an extension, let's say this summer, if that were to happen, there would be a serious conversation behind closed doors about what he would like to see in terms of improvements of the team or changes or whatever the case may be in order to make that team competitive against teams like the Florida Panthers. Because This to me feels like the ultimate example of why hockey is a team sport. In other sports, superstars can win you championships, right? With elite performances. Look no further than LeBron James willing teams into the NBA final in the prime of his career, early in his career, and Patrick Mahomes, to your point, winning Super Bowl after Super Bowl. He had a good team around him, but Patrick Mahomes was truly the star and was able to drive that ship. For Connor McDavid, he's on the ice 20 minutes a night. That's a third of the game. And so
Yeah.
it can't possibly rest on his shoulders. But then if he is to stay there, going back to my point, Wish, then that, to what you said there too, there has to be changes on multiple things.
Stan Bowman's the GM now. He's going to get a full summer to try to put his stamp on this roster. But again, if you want to flip it, the conversation about McDavid and the Stanley Cup Final and not having won in 2 trips there, they don't have championship level goaltending. They don't have championship level defensemen. They don't have championship level depth. They might not have championship level coaching. We can talk about that another time. The fact that they've been to the Stanley Cup Final 2 consecutive seasons is a tribute to McDavid's greatness, and the fact that he's been able to drag, along with Leon Draisaitl, this team there in consecutive seasons, despite not having anything close to what the Florida Panthers have on their roster.
Yeah, that's a very, very they don't have a Marchand, Lundell, was it Luostarinen line, right? That's an elite third line.
They barely have a Nate Schmidt. They
barely have a Nate Schmidt.
They're not good. They're not a championship level roster. And I think McDavid, if you look at his comments tonight, Arda, I think there's an acknowledgement of, hey, look at, the Panthers are just really good. And that's the bottom line. The Panthers are real good. The Oilers are a team that could maybe beat some of the teams coming out of the East, but they sure as hell aren't on the Panthers level.
Okay, so since we're saying that the Panthers are elite, Connor McDavid said it, we are saying it, why don't we rank them? Because now, look, we're going to use the word dynasty here. I want to put a caveat on this because when we use the word dynasty, longtime hockey fans will absolutely bring up the Oilers of the 80s and the Islanders of the 80s and the Montreal Canadiens going to the Stanley Cup Final 10 consecutive times, winning 5 consecutive cups in their 10 years. I understand all that. There are plenty of examples in NHL history of what you would truly define as a dynasty. But given our current salary cap era, things are a little different. Much harder to make it to the Stanley Cup Final 3 years in a row, let alone win 2 consecutive Stanley Cups like the Florida Panthers have just done. So if we are grading a definition of what a dynasty would look like in the salary cap era, Greg Wyshynski, how would we rank the top 5 salary cap era dynasties? So I guess that would be 05 and on.
Well, I mean, your definition of dynasty doesn't matter, Arda, because Matthew Tkachuk said they're a dynasty. So if Matthew Tkachuk says they're a dynasty, that's all you need. Commissioner Tkachuk said the Panthers are a dynasty. All right, let's start. Number 5, I'm going to leave it to you to take your pick. Do you want to take the LA Kings and their 2 Stanley Cup championships, or do you want to take the Boston Bruins with their 1 Stanley Cup championship and 2 other trips to the final that included a Game 7 loss to the St. Louis Blues? Which one do you like for number 5?
That was across 8 years. So they did have a really good stretch there. And, that could have also included the greatest regular season in history had not been for the Florida Panthers in the first round, hilariously. I'm going to pick the Kings only because it was in a 2-year span. They had 2 very different postseasons as well. Remember they squeaked in eighth place or whatever, and then they had one of the most dominant playoffs of all time, going up 3-0 in every series. And then the one 2 years later was quite different, but they still won the cup. So I would be inclined of those 2 choices to go with LA.
Okay, number 4 for me. This is a hard one because the Tampa Bay Lightning made a lot of conference finals and they made 3 consecutive Stanley Cup Finals. But as time has passed, I'm not trying to cheapen the cups because as a Devils fan back in 1995, It doesn't matter what the season looks like. Everyone has the same chance to win the cup. If you win it, it's legit. But when you compare it to what other teams have done, the 2 cups they won were in COVID-impacted years. That's undeniable, including one year where they scrambled all the divisions and played in bubbles and such. And then they lost to the Colorado Avalanche in the conference finals, or in the Stanley Cup Finals. So it's 3 straight trips. It's 2 cups, but I got to put them fourth because of the circumstances behind their cups. What, agree or disagree?
I don't know how much we should devalue those cup victories. In fact, I would argue they might be a little bit more surreal than other cup because it was such a.
It might be more difficult.
Might have been more challenging when it's all said and done. I would love to. Yeah, sure. No fans. They have to go through COVID checks every day. The mental, exhaustion of being in a hotel room all the time, like quarantining wasn't easy, right? For anybody, hockey fans, whatever. Imagine doing it as a hockey fan and then having to play at your absolute best, fighting for the Stanley Cup. Like, I don't know, when it's all like, I would love to watch documentaries when it, down the line on the bubble and how that all unfolded, because I imagine we'll get some really, really fascinating answers from people that were there, and especially on that Lightning team.
So would you move them up from 4?
So I'm looking at, like, honestly, with the other teams that are there, like maybe with the Panthers, I don't know, but the Panthers have recency bias. Number 3, though, I think is
number 3 is the Chicago Blackhawks. They win the cup in 2010, and then they win twice more after that, and that's pretty impressive. That's 3 Stanley Cups. I mean, from Taves, from Kane, Duncan Keith, everybody else. It's just really impressive. Number 2 is the Florida Panthers. I put them ahead of the Blackhawks. They only have 2 cup wins, but by God, 3 straight trips to the Stanley Cup, back-to-back Stanley Cup championships against Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. And again, when you look at this team and the way it's built, the domination, the absolute domination that was on display in these 2 seasons is just undeniable. But number 1, though, Arda, it's got to be Sid. It's got to be Crosby. It's got to be the Penguins. 3 Stanley Cups, 2009, and the back-to-backers. With the wins against the San Jose Sharks and the Nashville Predators. I think the Penguins dynasty of Sid, Malkin, Letang, and the rest is still number 1 for me in the salary cap era.
Yeah, and they have several trips to the Cup Final across like 10 or 12 years. So yeah, that era is definitely number 1. I think what goes against the Lightning, going back to what you asked, is the fact that the Panthers did it opposite to the Lightning, right? The Lightning won 2. Then they lost. The Panthers lost, then they won 2. So it's almost like a redemption story, as opposed to, this could be a downward trajectory, which it seems to be with the Lightning as they lost to the Panthers in the first round this year.
I wish we could go back and have that the apex of one of those Lightning teams play this Panthers team. Like that would be so cool, because I would just love to see how it plays. Vasilevsky and Hedman and Stamkos and Kucherov and all of them against this Panthers team would be like one for the ages. Like that would be my dream. Maybe my dream Cup Final of the Cap era, if we could get those 2 teams together.
Yeah, I guess 2013 was kind of like that with the high era Boston versus high era Chicago, but yet I still pick LA number 5. But yeah, those are our top 5 dynasty teams of the salary cap era. And that'll do it for us here on The Drop. It's been a fun season, partner. It is always a pleasure doing this show. I want to give a thanks to all of our producers, Justin, Brian, Chris, Kenny, Mike, everyone that worked on The Drop this year and also allows it to exist. This is year 4, man, and hopefully we're back for year 5, make it half a decade, and keep talking pucks here on ESPN.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure, Arda. And thanks everybody for tuning in during our late night sojourns through the Stanley Cup playoffs and especially the Stanley Cup Final. It's been a ton of fun. I want to thank all of the empty rooms in the press box where no one has bothered me and kicked me out. I always appreciate that. And thanks everybody for watching. It's been an amazing season.